Darkwood is a video game. You may not believe it, but this is a video game that is scary. That's it. That's the whole thing. Bye. Okay, but for real, let's start off with what everyone probably already knows about the game. This is a purely top-down view, similar to the point of view from a game like Hotline Miami. It is survival horror, but what makes this game very unique in the genre of horror nowadays is that it doesn't pull any cheap jump scares. In fact, it doesn't pull any jump scares at all. At the time of making this, I'm actually replaying the game, and I honestly didn't realize how addicting it was. So let's just say there's going to be a lot of spoilers, there's going to be a lot of lore, there's going to be a lot of all that good stuff, okay? So if you're one of those people who are midway through the game, you don't want any spoilers, click off and eat cereal, I guess? This game bleeds the word unsettling, and I've said that before in my previous video on games that are actually scary. This game simply focuses on ambience, sound effects, environment, and grotesque imagery. Now, there are times where you probably do get scared shitless in the game, but it's usually never because there's a pop-up on the screen or something jumps out at you with a loud sound effect. More often than not, when I'm playing the game and I get scared shitless, it is because I hear one of the cannibals or a monster growling and I get hit by it and I don't turn around in time. This game is very good at making you feel paranoid. The sound effects are superb at doing that. The music itself really amps it up and sends shivers down your spine. This game has some pretty cinematic feeling moments and I love them to death. One of my favorites being the wedding visit, which we'll touch on soon. So let's start with the prologue. You play as a doctor in this prologue, which will be an important character later on in the game. You're doing your daily studies and you decide you want to kill your dog with an axe. He finds a man passed out, which is actually the protagonist, the person you're going to be playing as soon. He finds a big metal key and takes it from the protagonist. Following that event, he begins to try to beat the answers out of you on where the key leads to, how to get an escape, that sort of thing. You escape the small torture room, find some tools to help you get out, to which you're greeted by the doctor with the lights shutting off instantly. To which the low background music and humming and droning and ambience just pours out. You're walking around the room, hearing your footsteps echo and the doors creaking as you open them. Every noise is unsettling to listen to, even scraping the fucking chair legs on the floor. I hate that noise. What ends up happening shortly after, however, is you find some gasoline, turn a generator on to turn the lights back on. Then you see a creature, a corpse of a man with radio signals coming out of its body. It tells you a code to a locked door. You open it and there's a human in there trying to beat the shit out of you. It is widely believed that this character is Janik, I might be butchering that name, which is a relative of a chicken lady character that will be coming up shortly in the story. Many dangerous creatures start to storm the house shortly after killing Janik, and you think it's over. There's a character, however, named the Trader, and you will trade with him throughout the game. He finds you and he rescues you from the clutches of the evil shadow creatures that try to storm the place and murder you. This is where the prologue ends, and this is where the actual game begins, where you start to play as the protagonist that the Doctor had picked up in the prologue. The Doctor is nowhere to be found for a majority of the game, but he will be discovered soon enough. So I've said Darkwood was a scary game, but I really didn't preface what the backstory and lore of it was. In a short summary for now, there was a plague that broke out in this place that is deemed Darkwood. Many people died, went crazy over it, and were mutated. The protagonist you play as was affected by this plague, and he was rendered ultimately mute. But he doesn't need to rest, he doesn't need to eat or sleep. He feeds off of this thing called essence, is what the game calls it, and mushrooms, which you put inside the oven to give you the essence. You later find a skill tree after upgrading the needle that you put all the essence into and inject yourself with. These will help you survive in the game. He hates his life. In fact, he dreads living. He used to have a pretty nice life. He was married with some pets, pretty American dream sounding stuff. The being is an entity that the protagonist was actually studying along with his Polish military group known as the Outsiders. It was a small group of soldiers, however, and one of them is highly implied to be the protagonist in this backstory. After shit went really south and they just started to get attacked by everything, he went through it all, tied up to a tree, the spores caused the infection of the plague into him, and he eventually swapped his clothes out for a scarecrow. It is highly implied that he was at the front of the doctor's house because he ran away from the savage attack and was the only survivor in the group. One of the reasons he was most likely breathing and passed out and on the verge of death and collapsing was due to the effects of the plague. To take a break from the backstory and lore for a second, let's just focus on the gameplay at hand right now. You're in a hideout that you have to find resources around and upgrade as time goes on. There is a map as well that also contains a lot of areas that you can get loot from to upgrade your stuff. This ranges from crafting new weapons, gear, armor, hot bar and inventory upgrades. What makes this game very fun and unique on survival horror is that it doesn't really give you much tutorial. It even says in a loading screen sometimes that the game will not hold your hand. What I struggle with sometimes too in this game is that it is hard to figure out what is lootable and what isn't. It is difficult to know what to click on to loot because some of the items blend in with the environment. It doesn't really entirely change the formula, however, on what you can loot. Sometimes they'll have backpacks, sometimes they'll have wood logs sprawled out on the ground. Once you know what items to click on and what is lootable, that kind of knowledge stays with you the rest of the game. Let's move on to something a little bit more interesting, a new character, actually. When you survive your first rough night, you will be greeted by a wolfman. He has a very sinister and cynical attitude, and he is kind of grim in what he tells you and how he says it. Very heavy spoiler regarding the wolfman, however, is that later on into the game, you have a choice whether you can murder him or not. He has very aggressive sounding lines. I'm paraphrasing what he says, but it was something along the lines of, "Good thing you smell the way you do, or else you would have been dinner." He has a very strange sense of humor that puts the player on an uneasy feeling and gives you a paranoid feeling of, will he attack me at any point? He is, however, a very major part of this game and a very big character in the story. He's very big on trading guns and weaponry and things like first aid kits and medicine. He can also supply you very good tools to aid you early on and later on in the game. He sends you on tasks throughout the game, many of which I will be talking about later on. The reason this wolfman even comes to you in the first place is he offered you coordinates for the doctor's location that stole the key. What makes this a very creepy character, however, is that his reasons for killing is not feral like a hound might feast on a corpse or something along the lines. He has psychopathic tendencies and he doesn't care about human life in the slightest. He's willing to kill for his own gain, and he's willing to kill if he just doesn't get what he wants. Some of his camps, or even his big hideout near the later end of the game, consists of many feral dogs lurking throughout. He is known as a replica or an imperfect clone. These replicas are created by the being and the white substance that is in Darkwood. Normally, the being creates replicas by dead or immobilized people or creatures or even objects. The being and its white substance cannot really tell these objects or people apart and usually end up morphing multiple things together at the same time. There is a character known as the Snail that is a good example of this as well. What's neat about this game is that a majority of the nights have something special going on in each one. It's not just the same survive the horrors. In this clip, there's a character on my bed saying creepy things to me. And well, I want to talk about something that I actually thoroughly enjoyed replaying, and I can't even recall ever playing it in my first playthrough. And that is the wedding visit. There's a piece of paper in the front of your door saying you are invited. They give a 4-number code, which will obviously be very useful when you get to the wedding. It consists of ghost women, brides dancing around and frolicking, saying, "Dance with me." The music and atmosphere instantly kick in once you enter the building. Ghosts and apparitions are playing tricks on you, saying things like, "We've been expecting you," until it stops turning into just atmosphere and some shit starts to hit the fan really fast. I'm going to play most of what clips I have salvaged of the wedding visit because I want you to experience what I experienced. I had to run back through the cornfield that I came from to get to this place, and I went to upgrade my weapon. And when I got back, she was stuck in the cornfield, and I fucking owned her, dude. This game makes a great atmosphere, and it makes a great build up to said atmosphere, always. Sometimes certain areas are just pure ambience and sound effects, and just things to make you uneasy feeling. but some things like this wedding visit actually have some sort of danger. The unpredictability of these events in Darkwood make this game very fun and very refreshing and exciting. You won't know whether to run or whether to just stay immobilized, paralyzed with fear. Since I hadn't played this game in quite some time and I'm replaying it again, I've assumed that light sources near buildings would help me survive, always. However, I was sorely fucking mistaken. Ran as fast as I could, and they caught me in the game of Darkwood. The game's progression speed is honestly phenomenal. You do a little bit day by day, return to your hideout to survive the night with the tools that you have recently gotten through your exploration. Sometimes it feels like you're just hanging by the skin of your teeth, and sometimes it feels like you're overstocked and you could take on the world. It really depends on where you go to salvage that day. It feels kind of rewarding to see everything marked down on the section of the map just to know that you did actually go to those places, get shit done, and make a change. Knowing that those tools will go towards helping you survive even further is also a nice feeling. Most of the time, when there's an obstacle in the way, there's usually a wardrobe or a shelf nearby that has loot that helps you take care of that. It tries to prevent the player from running minutes back to their base, wasting time of the day just to retrieve a couple items. Although the game claims it doesn't hold your hand, that part to me feels a little bit like hand holding. The thing I enjoy thoroughly about this game is the fact that it uses environmental elements and environmental storytelling through the use of things you can interact with or not interact with. An example being a sleeper that I found that claimed that there was a hidden passage somewhere underneath one of the hideouts in the area. Most NPCs or characters seem to talk right when you're about to leave them, which is just really funny to me. The game does a lot with just one image and a couple walls of text. They narrate everything perfectly, and then they show you images when they absolutely need to. It's just enough information about what you're seeing and what you're encountering that's enough to put you on edge. Also, the protagonist forms thoughts in the form of text at the bottom of the screen sometimes to kind of show you what's going on in his head and what he's thinking about. There are also dream sequences in this game, following the protagonist, his train of thought, just what he goes through. Most of the time, his mind is playing tricks on him within this game, and this is the only time that he really ever does sleep when you have to click on a bed in order to exit the dream sequence. Most, if not all, dream sequences offer a decent amount of backstory and lore. Even as vague as some of the dreams may seem on surface level, there is still a lot of substance to it, even without digging too deep into them. When I mention the game's progression, it really is a phenomenal thing. They don't just thrust you into one base, but multiple bases throughout each act. There's a prologue, two acts, and an epilogue. I like to call things acts, but they are referred to as chapters mainly. In order to get shit done and be safe while doing it, you're going to have to set up camp in multiple different areas. That includes gathering more resources for that individual spot that you just discovered that is safe and just barricading it. The nights do get harder over time, and depending on which area of the map you are in, then those nights will be even tougher. What I love about this game is that it still maintains its freshness over time, no matter where you go in the game. You might just think it's a bunch of batches of enemies and a bunch of crates scattered throughout the world, but that's further from the truth. They love to throw curveballs at you in this game, and they love to give you encounters that you've never experienced before and are nervous to tackle. They always want you to be on your toes and never know their next move. In the background, I discover a truck, and it seems pretty normal. Gather some scrap from it, that sort of thing, but then you begin to hear growling coming from it. I may be butchering these names because I'm pretty sure most of these are Polish, but you run into a man named Piotrek, and he is a vendor and a major character in this story. He's pretty off-putting to look at, he looks fidgety, but he's a good tinker, and he sells you a lot of really good gadgets that you can use along your journey. He's a little loony in the head, and he dreams of building a spaceship in order to escape from Darkwood. You can bring him multiple different items in order to aid him in building the rocket ship. It sounds like a really stupid plan, but he's really into it, so you might just go along with it. Unfortunately, however, you bring up this idea to the Wolfman, and the Wolfman is not having any of this shit. I think it's safer to bring up the end of these quest lines later to when it actually gets to Act 2, when this actually does unfold. Oh boy, I want to talk about this place actually. I want to talk about it a little bit. Okay, just let me, please. So this is known as the Village in Darkwood. When I first came here, I honestly thought it was going to be barren and empty, but I was very wrong. The village folk aren't aggressive, but they're very sick and in dire need of mental help. The protagonist even claims that he's not welcome here by the villagers. They give him weird looking eyes and glances and turn the other way. Some don't really mind him, some even offer help. This village is home to a couple important characters in the story. As you're running through the village, there's an old woman who just has a deadpan expression on her face, but as you walk away from her, she tells you to kill the sow. This will come up later in the story. In the village, you may stumble upon a house with many chickens around it, and this is because this is home of the chicken lady. Remember that man that was murdered in the doctor's house, known as Janik? Well, this is his sister's house, and she does live here. What's unsettling about this chicken lady, though, is that she dons a very precious-looking smile when you're speaking to her, but as you venture deeper within her house, you begin to hear noises that just don't sound normal or right. Another piece of solid proof that Janik was the one trapped within the doctor's office that is pretty hardcore evidence is that when you show her a toy duck that was in the doctor's house, she claims that it was Janik's gift. She even goes further into talking about Janik and claims that he stormed off in a fit of rage to go see that other fella. She hands you a photo of Janik and the fella and, well, who is that guy in the photo? Surely it's not. Fuck. Not only does this doctor beat the shit out of you, steal your key, and just fuck off and you don't know where he is, but he also seemed to abandon a village that desperately needed him to fix them. Guy playing the violin, huh? Who could this guy be? Say hello to the musician. This is yet another person harmed by the plague. In order to court the chicken lady's sister, he attempts to play his shitty violin outside of her room window. Although not much is known about the chicken lady's sister at this time, he refers to her as the pretty lady. He is very much in love with her, and he even says that he wants to marry her. This is where another questline starts in order to try to get a key to her room. Those weird noises coming from the chicken lady's back house was apparently from the deformed sister, but they didn't sound too normal. The reason he's so valuable, however, is he can get you to the doctor, the one that screwed you the fuck over, but you're gonna have to help him for him to do that for you. He's on good standing with the doctor because the doctor had given him a wooden mask for him to shield his face. He is an essential asset in this entire story in order to get you to the doctor. But nothing in this game ever comes free, you have to scratch other people's backs first. There's honestly nobody else you can believe in at this point in the village, they're all goners. People have been getting pissed lately in the village as well because they're not getting the meat that they were promised. The lore behind this entire village is very interesting with a lot of unique characters that go against one another or for one another. It's a dying place and people with very little or no hope. The being did create the plague, and this plague just seems to make everybody way more aggressive. You will later find out why people aren't getting their meat though, is because the sow, the pig that the lady in the village wanted you to kill, is not producing any more pigs. Although the wedding visit was a very scary place, the pig shed might be even scarier. The ambience it gives out, the squealings of pigs, the one villager trying to defend the mother of all pigs from you. It really is a depressing and sad depiction of people who are so far gone mentally and are so desperate for any sort of food. You have the choice to leave the mother of all pigs alone or kill her, end her life. And the mother of all pigs just so happens to look like... As I looked up the inspiration for these developers, it was no surprise that one of them was David Lynch, popular American filmmaker from horror movies such as Eraserhead or The Elephant Man, things that widely depict some sort of body horror or disfigurement. Everything in this game seems to intertwine, and it's very interesting to see how their relationships are with one another. It's no surprise every character knows each other in this game. It's a place that they've been stuck in for God knows how long. This game is still throwing new shit at me, even though I just thought that I knew everything. Let's touch briefly on the lore of the mother of all pigs, shall we? Being the primary source of food for the villagers, they rely on the sow's offspring for meat. There are severe repercussions to killing her, and many places within Darkwood will be affected by you killing her. There is a note around the pig shed that shows that a pig farmer was feeding the sow human meat. Now, I failed to mention yet that there was a old woman named Hanuska. She isn't a major character, she is quite a minor character, but the actions she did were very consequential within the lore of the village. Hanuska gave birth to a child who was deemed an abomination and later killed by the villagers. Her house was also burned down and her husband had died in the fire. This is an old lady with a lot of hate in her heart for her own villagers, mind you. The child died by being thrown down a well. I went down said well and found them, and they were in the form of a small red chomper. But weren't you just talking about the sow? Why are you talking about this woman named Hanuska now? Well, there were some cables that were cut to the pig shed. Well, this just sounds like speculation. Am I saying that Hanuska cut the cables to the pig shed and caused this entire famine? Yes, I am. Because when you kill her, if you decide to kill her, she'll drop a knife and a cable, and that's all that's in her inventory. Seems kinda like she did it, huh? But unfortunately for her, things went south when the pig farmer died. The pig farmer was the one who was feeding the sow the entire time. The sow ended up killing the pig farmer, though, shortly after the pig shed's cables were cut by Hanuska. This is what, in turn, started the famine throughout the village, and unfortunately, the sow wasn't getting fed in order to produce meat. Speaking of the sow, I killed the mother of all pigs off camera. I'm making my way to the Wolfman because he demanded I kill it, and he rewards me with a hotbar upgrade. This game's very good at making you feel ashamed and guilty of your actions, really no matter what you do. For a game as depressing as it is and self-loathing as the main protagonist is, I really do try to go out of my way to help and save as many people as I can, but ultimately that's just not what's gonna happen. Remember when I talked about that rocket ship quest with Pietrek? Well, I'm on my way to help him now. The footage you see is me giving him only a small handful of parts for the rocket ship. He needed 4, but at the time of writing this, I successfully found and gave him all 4. The least I could do was try to show some compassion to a crazy guy because I just ruined a village's only source of food. He claims that he's going to blast off into space after I give him all the parts, but don't worry, we're going to see him real soon in Act 2. I'd rather not do every single quest in favor for Wolfman because his idea of a quest involves just murdering people for his own enjoyment. Now, I've been putting it off for a while in this game, but the fact is that I need to get a key covered in chicken feces in order to make it to the room with the deformed sister from the chicken lady. Depending on who I give the key to, things will end differently. If I give the key to the Wolfman, he will eat her alive, and if I give it to the musician, nothing happens. But I don't really care what ending I get, so I'm probably going to give it to the Wolfman. No other game has really made me spend this much time avoiding a choice. The visuals will always remain to be very impressive to me. When it comes to pretty much everything the player can act upon or do, or even the enemies transforming, the animations are super fluid. The closest thing that gets to a jump scare is probably hearing the chomper roar, which is pretty loud in the grand scheme of things. Even the journal special items are creepy looking sometimes. Although I touched on it briefly and didn't dive too deep into it, I mentioned the being and the white substance. Now, what the hell is the being and what the hell is this white substance that I talk about? Well, there was a bright object being seen falling from the sky over Darkwood one night, and this object caused a very fast infection and it was spreading everywhere. Places were shut down, roads were barricaded, but eventually the forest ate all of that up. The white substance usually flows through the roots, but you can actually see it on a cracked road surface on the road home. It is what's responsible for the replicas, and it's what's responsible for the plague. Speaking of the plague, I've only touched on a few of the symptoms. Do you really want to know all of them? Because it's kind of a meaty list. We'll talk on physical deterioration first. Humans can turn into chompers, and dogs can turn into huge dogs. For humans, however, they don't always just turn into chompers right away. Most of the symptoms for the humans usually consist of this: body growth like deformities, hair loss, headaches, and heightened aggression. For animals such as dogs, however, it's mainly just increasing their size and muscle mass. They do probably get way more aggressive, but physically, that's all we can see. These symptoms of the plague usually make themselves known far more often than others within gameplay in Darkwood. We see a lot more hair loss and deformities than anything else, really, and the heightened aggression could be very much applied to the Wolfman. For the second section of this, however, it is mental deterioration. But there are many other symptoms under this mental state, and that usually includes auditory and visual hallucinations, insomnia, or just not eating, loss of the ability to speak, kind of like our main protagonist, the need to go home, wherever that may be, and the loss of ability to write, and no self-preservation skills, and even the desire to eat wood and mushrooms. Now, it's very interesting to state all of these out loud because our protagonist deals with a lot of these on a day-to-day basis. Some of the skills in the skill tree for your protagonist consists of being able to heal by eating mushrooms and wood bark. He was ultimately rendered mute, his mouth is non-existent. So what's the deal with these mushrooms, because they seem to be growing everywhere? Well, in the lore of this infection, the spores were really the main thing that caused them. It's difficult to say what the essence is, however. You turn mushrooms into it and you turn rotten meat into it. But since the majority of what you're cooking is going to be poisonous mushrooms, we can probably deduce that this essence is liquid spores. And this does make sense because for each injection that you do, there seems to be new skills opening up that fit the plague symptoms that I've listed previously. There are many, many pieces that add to this lore, and I really am not going to be able to list every single one. We'd be here for hours. There are a plethora of notes scattered throughout the world that give good implications on certain things. A majority of the notes come from characters that we'll be meeting in the game, and most of them just go into how depressed they are and how the being is keeping them from seeing the outside world. I also had mentioned replicas briefly, but let's talk about it a little bit more. Replicas are, like I stated, imperfect versions of a living being. I had recently started going to the area of the Old Woods, so I feel like I can talk about this part now. There is a cabin, a hunter cabin, and the Wolfman is a replica of the huntsman who lived in the Old Woods cabin, most likely merging with the trophy of a wolf or just a dog. He has a lot of resentment towards these villagers, but why? Is he just an asshole? Evidence kind of proves not quite. He has some sort of link to the Chicken Lady's family. Have you ever stopped and thought why he wanted to eat the Chicken Lady's deformed sister? Also known as the Pretty Lady by the musician. Although it's not 100% certain which spouse he married into, he's definitely linked to the Chicken Lady's family in some sort of way. The Wolfman has a wedding ring on his finger. Now, if you go to the Hunter's Lodge in the Old Woods, you can find a dead man. It is widely believed for this corpse to just be the Wolfman's. If you inspect the corpse in the Hunter's Lodge, you'll see that the ring on his finger is a wedding ring, and it just so happens to be the exact same that's on the Wolfman's finger. I doubt that the Wolfman would go through so much trouble, even though he is such a sociopathic lunatic, to just try to convince me, the protagonist, that he was somehow married to these random people. I doubt he would want to drop such a subtle clue that I would pick up on. The traitor is also a replica of the protagonist. It is widely believed that the traitor was formed as a replica during the time that the protagonist was tied up to the tree in his hazard suit before the prologue began. And there's a decent amount of evidence to say that this is the case because they share the same height and they have the same appearance and the possession of a key to Tunnel 21 and his journal. There are stark similarities between the key to Tunnel 21 and the journal from both the traitor and the protagonist if you line them up side by side. What I have failed to mention about the traitor as of yet is that he is oddly compassionate towards the protagonist. He seems to be very thankful that you're alive, and he's quite a positive person. This is widely believed and theorized to be the true protagonist's personality before the effects of the plague and the infection took over him. The traitor wants to keep you alive throughout the entire game, and he makes it very clear. He is branded a liar in this game, but I believe that it is for a very strange reason. The traitor also shows some deep concern for the protagonist as he ventures deeper into the woods. He tells the protagonist to turn back whenever he can and to not venture further into the woods. There are many theories, and I'd love to talk about them, but first we must get to Act 2 because there are some huge spoilers regarding the traitor. But all you need to know right now is that he's very compassionate towards the protagonist and he gets worried for their well-being, but he's also called a liar. I want you to think about that. There are more replicas within this game, but we will touch on them as we venture further within the game. There are a handful of things that are widely unexplained or hard to fathom in Darkwood. One of them could be the shiny stones that you pick up. They go for quite a bit of reputation with the traders, but in one of the notes there is a man regarding a name Machik. I think I butchered the fuck out of that name, but I'll put it up on the screen. It is widely believed that those who are infected with the plague are drawn to these stones. This would make sense why they go for so much reputation, as everybody is pretty much infected with the plague, so they find a higher value in these shiny stones. It is also widely believed that these stones are meteorite fragments of the being when it crash landed. It was even said within the note with Machik that he grabbed his lucky stone and ventured forth, taking all of the gear from the camp. This heavily implies that this man was infected with the plague, and he set forth to the being because of this infection. There are also some miscellaneous stuff like big bugs and some worms. Now, these big bugs could just be a little bit mutated, but they're not really that much of a threat or a threat at all. You just bash them and take their shells in the game. Another one could be these ghost events that sort of happen during nighttime. When I'm playing the game, there will sometimes be flickering lamps and even earthquakes. It is very safe to say that the being could be causing all of these poltergeist events and all of these earthquakes. The being, however, doesn't seem to have its own control over the white substance that creates these replicas. But what is a little counterproductive is the fact that it beckons for people to come towards it while also blocking off the path to it. I mean, if the being really did want everybody to come towards it, wouldn't the substance also just clear a path for everybody? Or is this just one of the being's sick jokes? Remember when I said that there would be consequences for killing the sow? Well, here's some gameplay of that taking place. Now, I might not do it. Oh my god, that was the worst voice crack I ever fucking had. They build a shrine, and you can even see some villagers praying to the corpse of the sow, along with some torches, very ritualistic. There's also a very creepy event that takes place after killing the sow. There's a man sitting outside of a big house, and somebody claims that the leader of the village would like to have a word with you in there. Now, there's no people present within the house per se, only in the basement. But basically, what ends up happening is that he's very certain that you are the one who killed the sow, and he tries to sick one of the chompers he has locked in the basement at you, along with a couple other normal villagers. Speaking of progressing through the game, I finally managed to get the key covered in chicken feces, and I'm in the pretty lady's room. So I have a choice within this game now across two quest lines. Give the key to the wolfman and he will eat her, or give it to the musician and nothing really happens. Speaking of which, she looks like, I'm really excited for this part of the game because we're getting a lot of shit done really fast. I gave him the key, which covered in chicken feces, and he's very thankful about it, and he even gives me a little present to give to the chicken lady in return. We're gonna make one last trip to the village because there's really not much else we can do past this point. We already killed the sow. So I remember I said I wasn't going to go into the basement with the villagers sicking the red chomper on me. But then I remembered any side shit you do in this game gives you pretty decent loot, so I went and did it anyways. I show the severed chicken head to the chicken lady and she's very distraught. Courtesy of the wolfman, I guess. I also adventure further into her house once more, and I find that the pretty lady is nowhere to be seen. She's taken, sheets and all. Wonder if that's because of the wolf man. And there's also a wedding ring in the wardrobe. I wonder who she was married to. Here's some quick footage of me battling the villagers along with the red chomper. They really didn't like that we killed the sow, so they try to get me once and for all. Unfortunately, it's a crawler attached to a chain, and they're much weaker than a running chomper. I also have good weapons at this point too, so... Well, I make it to Wolfman's hideout, which is some barn ruins covered with dogs, and he's very thankful that I gave him the key. Although the Wolfman can be sinister, cynical, and a little bit of a dick sometimes, he does keep his end of the bargain on this doctor's whereabouts. We know where he is, he's in the old woods, we just don't have a code to access him. The wolf knows where his old house is though, the one in the prologue, so we'll take a trip over there for some clues. In hindsight, it was a bad idea to bring all of my food that I could have cooked into essence with me on this trip, and you'll see why soon. But this is where it all started. This is the doctor's house. Right below this house, too, was sort of a clinic with a lot of patients in there. One was still alive, just saying crazy shit. It was run down, and the doctor did his best to try to save the people, but ultimately it ended up failing. He was a well-meaning man, but everyone just didn't like him, and he got too stressed over not being able to find a cure for this plague. I run into the house, and it feels just like old times, memory lane, and I also noticed a safe on the ground. Here's the reason why I shouldn't have brought all of the food that I could have turned into essence with me. You see, I spent about 30 minutes searching through this house for the code to the safe, and then it was nowhere to be found, so I searched outside where the dead dog was, and nothing. I also went to the clinic to search for any sort of notes, nothing turned up. The madman told me to kill him and take the key to his house. It was just down the road, so I did it. I mean, he was a goner anyways. I went to his house with the key, found some materials, but more importantly an axe, which is a very good weapon. So you notice this photo, you know how there's 6 numbers? Initially I thought that that was the code, and then I realized quickly that it was only 4 digits in the safe. So what I did was that I applied the first 4 numbers to the safe, and nothing. I applied different versions of that 6 number combo. I would interchange them, and I even did it in reverse. I ran back and forth through the clinic, I even looked outside by the broken down truck, I even tried to run out of the map. I was actually going fucking loony. I shit you not, I was inspecting every single item that I've picked up for my journal. I was inspecting the plastic chick, I was inspecting the locket with the 2 kids, I was finding anything with any string of numbers that has ever been used before in the past, just in case. And fucking nothing. So 30 minutes later, and a lot of frustration, it finally struck me. I just looked up the fucking answer. Let me tell you why I may have never figured this out. You see, on the safe, there is etchings into the ground, and there's a huge chicken scratch line that goes across the entire floor of the house. Now, initially, I noticed that there was something off. I saw pieces of paper on the ground, and I thought that they resembled some sort of number, so I was looking there. And then I realized it was all just blurry mess. But apparently there are numbers riding the line. I thought that the 8 resembled sort of a mushroom icon like on the map, so I didn't think much of it. I followed the entire line and eventually found the numbers on the ground, and what's kind of fucked up is that some of them only appear in the light and some of them appear outside of the light cone. Hope you don't hate me for it, but I have a feeling I wasn't the first one who was this confused. So I open the safe, find a toy, which is a little depressing, and I find a train code, and I did find a train, and it was also marked by Wolfman as the doctor's whereabouts. It had a 4-digit code that it was needed, and it's on that piece of paper, so I guess we're going to pay him a visit. Well, 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 look who it is. How the fuck are ya? The man who stole your key, the man who robbed you of your freedom. He had a handmade distillery inside of his doctor's office, so one can assume he's just an alcoholic now with depression. Giving up on all hope, and in a train car at the very end, he calls me your kind. What does that mean? Jesus Christ. One of my clips screwed up, but basically he says at the very end, I just want to go home, and he's trembling while he's saying it. Wow, dude, I feel really, mixed emotions, I guess. Suffering alcoholic who just misses his family, and I mean, he has every right to. The path has been blocked off forever. He more or less agreed to treat the people locally for a limited amount of time, but that didn't go as planned, and now he can't see his family again. His wife and daughter were probably evacuated, but he stayed behind in order to cater to the sick ones. The heightened aggression of the plague made him have to strap down people to beds. He searched through books for hours, and no remedies were able to be discovered. He stuck around the plague, and he stuck around dead or those who are already dying. And he can't help anybody. This is probably why he was pissed at the protagonist in the first place. He was somebody who was dying and he couldn't save him. That's probably what he means by your kind. But even despite all of my frustration towards the doctor, I agreed to help him escape because he has only one hope and it's the key, so. He said he'll meet me at the tunnel where the giant metal door is, and for the meantime, I'm just trying to pick what I need to get out because they say that once I'm in that tunnel, I am not going back to this place. I make a trip back to the Wolfman to trade, and as you can see, there's the half-eaten corpse of the deformed sister. I guess that key really did help him in the end. He even states that he was able to be with his pretty lady again, or something along the lines of that. There was a trophy in the Hunter's Lodge that was supposed to have some sort of animal head on it, but there was none. This really just heavily alludes to the fact that the hunter was the Wolfman and that it just merged the trophy and his body together. Just further evidence for that theory. Nevertheless, I make my way towards a doctor with what I think is best equipment to take with me. Luckily, he didn't ditch me, and my act of kindness actually pulled through. But we're out of these woods and we're into something new now. Out of the frying pan and into something just much worse. We meet a new type of enemy or whatever it is, and we venture forth into the swamp. A completely new environment is bestowed upon us, and it is much more dangerous and scarier than the last. To balance out this amount of danger, though, this is where items really amp up and you start getting higher tier loot from everything. The exceedingly rare weapon piece, such as an axe blade or a shovel head, now is almost a common item in the swamp. It has become incredibly easy to loot wardrobes and get a plethora of items, and this in turn brings up the inventory management commentary. At the time of writing this, I've maxed out the hotbar and inventory upgrades. But still, even so, there's so much lootables within the game that I end up having to run back to base after only a couple trips to new areas. There's a plethora of lootables around this entire area, and I've barely scratched the surface of the map. Don't let the fact that it's just one area known as a swamp fool you. Although the first act had three different areas, the dry meadows, silent forest, and the old woods, this place is home to a lot of danger. One of the ones I hate mainly are the banshees and human spiders. A new quote-unquote mechanic that is introduced to us right off the get-go is oxygen tanks. Equipping these will help us dive into the deeper parts of the swamp in order to reach new areas and do new things. And don't worry about new enemies, the swamp really does have a lot of them, especially newer ones at night. So Act 2, The Swamp, a whole new world of opportunity. Great, but this comes with some caveats. You'll see soon why. But I survived my first night in the swamp and I upgraded myself even further. This is where we are introduced to a new batch of characters. Meet the three, silent characters that just kind of look at you and show you a bag of goodies, which in turn means that these guys will be your new trader. But I miss the old trader, though. I kind of want him. He was very nice and compassionate, and he actually kind of communicated somewhat with writing on his arm. Where the fuck is he? Okay, cool, man. Fuck it, why not? So, I guess the trader got killed when he was following me through the swamp. And this is where the theories start pouring in about the trader's death. A lot of people say it's obvious, and a lot of people like to speculate. I might play devil's advocate a little bit here and just name off the theories and not give my 2 cents about it, so you'll never know. There's pretty much just two likely theories, and some people might be crazy enough to come up with a third of their own. So we'll just talk about the two main ones. It was either the three, the people that you meet the day after you survive the swamp for the first time, or the protagonists themselves. After doing some research, I've come to notice that a majority lean towards the three being the killers, while a very minority believe it's the protagonist. So why would the three kill the traitor? Let's figure this out. Well, there's some decent evidence to explain this. For one, when they open the sack, which by the way is a sack that they stole from the dead trader's body, it smells of mushrooms, which is the same sentence they give the trader's sack when you first meet him. They haven't really been known to be violent characters throughout the game. People's slam dunk of an argument for this is that they carved liar or etched it into the helmet. Not to mention, it's the three's homeland, and the other villagers have scrawled thieves in the village near the swamp too. It is also used in the same sort of writing. Unless the three themselves wrote thieves into the floor in the village, there's really hardly a connection. But what the hell could the traitor have lied to the three about? This is widely speculated, but maybe the traitor was saying something that just wasn't true about the village, perhaps the talking tree. Maybe they took offense and lashed out, who knows? Or maybe it's the fact that the traitor is an imperfect replica of the protagonist. In a way, that itself is a lie because the traitor is not the true protagonist. Sounds poetic as shit, but that is a theory. I mean, the timing plus the soul and sack with the same contents that the trader gives you and possibly the writing, these are pretty big chunks of evidence. The second one is the protagonists themselves. Now, why would the traitor be deemed a liar by the protagonist? Well, the traitor was always telling the protagonist there was no way out of the forest, and he was telling the truth. But since the protagonist is kind of under the control of the plague and this infection, the protagonist also has histories of hallucinations, visual and auditory, even through gameplay, not even just cutscenes. What is also very strange is that when you inspect his corpse, the traitor's that is, he doesn't seem to recognize it, he just kind of calls him I'm the man or a man. There's no emotion behind his observation. The three also just don't appear to be violent, and the protagonist has had a string of violent tendencies throughout the game. All in all, a very depressing part of the game, and just very unfortunate the way things unfolded the way they did. Onto a different character, we talk to the doctor who's helped escape. Now, you can find him in 3 different areas randomly throughout this game per playthrough. You can pretty much take one item of his for free. He offers 3 different items. He doesn't really trade though, you only just take one free item and that's it. What's unfortunate about this character is the way that he slowly begins to lose his mind because the effects of the plague are taking place. He looks all muddy and disheveled. Now, what may physically look like a normal man who's been through the mud, we will soon later find out that this is not just random mud splatters on his body. He starts spouting nonsense, and he even talks about his little girl that he misses so much. I think I've hardly seen him talk about his wife, but I guess his daughter matters more to him. You know, we're pretty much over halfway done with meeting all these major characters. The next one coming up is the cripple. He's an old ex-World War II vet. He's lost both legs and just sits within a chair. He had somebody that he cared about named Zocha, who died after succumbing to the plague. Now, the old World War II vet deems that the road home is not a road at all. It's a road to madness, in fact. This is very high implications that we should not follow the being's call. Perhaps the being is not leading us home. The only survivor of this large village, that is, other than the talking tree. He loved the place dearly, and he can be a little cranky at times, but he survives just by catching fish in the flooded streets. He gives us a task to kill the talking tree. It is an amalgamation of all of the inhabitants of the village at one point. It is just a friendly reminder for him to know that all of the people he loved are suffering now within that piece of wood. In order to do what we do, we must first find an oxygen tank that works in order to dive deep enough to find the roots of the tree. Unfortunately, the doctor who tried to seek escape and get to his family once again has seemed to suffer severe consequences of the plague. As you can see in the footage, the second time upon meeting him, he has more mud and even some sticks sticking out of his head. If you've been watching the gameplay, you know that there are some enemies called savages which don the same sort of crown of mud and sticks. He is slowly turning into a savage. His brain is pretty much becoming mush and he's going loony. Honestly, I should be saying he had his comeuppance and he deserves his fate, but I can't help but feel bad for him. Isolated from his family for so long, presumably evacuated too, they might be dead. He couldn't solve the plague, and that's not really on him. It's probably unsolvable. I find kind of a worn down shed, and this is home to the elephant's family. Very major characters in this story in the swamp. She demands I fix the generator before she opens the door for me for a chat. Luckily, the whole place was laden with bear traps, and I got all the metal scraps from disarming them, and I just plucked it right into the generator. She demands I bring one of the sons that escaped from her back, and in exchange she might give me a gift. I snooped around the kid's room and I found some notes with a map with some coordinates to an area kind of roughly circled. So fuck it, I guess we're going there next. The mother of this elephant's family is highly religious and controlling, and it is kind of creepy. However, moving on to a new minor character, I discovered a place with holes laden around it. As you saw from the previous footage maybe a minute ago, there was a earthworm mixed with an old man. This is because this is the minor character that was creating these holes. I'm not really complaining as he seems to be particularly harmless and he created a hole that helps me fast travel to my hideout from across the map, so I'm not really complaining. There's not much that we know about the tunneler except that he was morphed with an earthworm and an old man, so. Speaking of new characters, I find a old key in a mushroom hut. This is presumably where the kid is hiding, or at least once visited. Meet the mushroom granny. She was an old lady with arthritic knees and could barely walk out of her chair. She loved all of her 7 grandchildren dearly and her daughter. The 3, however, had their father presumably killed, and the 3 were banished. She was part of the Sector 3C village, one of the first areas to get infected by the plague. She quickly escaped the village in search of her daughter and went to the swamp, and this village had not seen her since. She is very obviously fused with mushrooms and the old lady. She has no recollection of what happened to the 3's father or the 3 really in general, but she very much remembers her daughter. She demanded I kill the freaks that were apparently peering through her window one night, and in exchange she might help me find the boy. So why not? We're going on another quest. I find this character to be one of the most unfortunate, what you're seeing on the screen. This is the third visit from the doctor, and he is a jumbled mess, and you can't really make out his face anymore because of all the mud and sticks growing out of it. His speech is now condensed into maybe 5 word sentences and even 1 word sentences. He is as primitive as it gets now, and it is really a sad display. I was hoping he'd find some catharsis and maybe get to his family and feel healed, but this is unfortunately the fate that was sealed from the start with him. As far as I know, I can't really meet him again after this third visit. This is the final time we'll be seeing him. To touch back briefly on the Mushroom Granny, she even says something along the lines of, "Oh, I thought you were," and then dot dot dot. I wasn't expecting any guests. This highly alludes to the fact that she probably thought I was the daughter that was visiting her, that she so dearly was looking for. I feel like I said a lot of words, including many children going on, so let's try to briefly simplify all of it. There were 7 grandchildren. 3 of them were the traders that you will meet, and the other 4 were under the guise and control of the Elephant Mother. Unfortunately, one of the 4 children under the control of the Elephant Mother had died. She claims that he helps them breathe oxygen that is going into their tanks. The kid presumably brought back an outsider journal depicting all of the studies on the being. The mother thought it was evil, but for an unknown reason, that's when the child pretty much died, and his body was locked in a shed by the mother. The child who had run away, his name is Marcinek, I don't know. I'll put it up on the screen. But the Mushroom Granny was the grandmother of that Marcinek. So to put it briefly, the Elephant family, and the Mushroom Granny are all connected somehow. If you want to talk about Act 1 characters coming back to haunt us, I figured out what that key was for. And I'll just let the gameplay do the talking. Well, the musician is back and he looks very different. Since he was a child born into the plague, since his parents had already gotten it, it is safe to say that his growth has something to do with the plague. Something like stress might even contribute to these weird symptoms of the plague. Why would the musician be stressed? Well, the backstory to the entire village was that since we killed the sow, they actually escaped to the swamp by cutting down all the trees before they could regrow. They went crazy over their pig dying. Well, crazier. But the musician was always the outcast and was shunned upon for his deformities. The villagers wanted nothing to do with this deformed kid, and they decided to run him off. He found the hideout that I found, and he's just living kind of in the closet area. He means well, and he's not hostile in the slightest, and he even apologizes profusely for things that aren't really his fault. But he does claim, however, that the villagers are sleeping on rocks of some kind, and he even claims that it could be a quarry of sorts. Seeing the progression of the plague on major characters that we've known since Act 1 is kind of depressing to watch. First it was the doctor, and now the musician's just growing in size and he can't stop it. Act 1 characters are coming back to haunt us in Act 2. Speaking of the quarry, guess what I found on my map? And guess who's inhabiting this place? Yep, you guessed it, the villagers from Act 1. The doctor was spouting nonsense about how the villagers cut through trees, and even though he tried, he could never get it to succeed. I guess he was actually spouting truth. You can even see all of the trees that they had cut down, and they haven't even grown back yet. If you venture deeper within the cut down trees, you'll notice that there is a giant hole. The musician mentioned this sort of hole, and he claims that it is from something otherworldly. I put 2 and 2 together quickly, and these are probably the evil eyes peering through the Mushroom Granny's window that she demanded I take care of. I took them out one by one, and they were incredibly hostile upon seeing me. I didn't even have to hit them first. There was some lootables, but I had to take care of the rest of the village. I go deeper into the quarry, and there are tents with many sick villagers in them. People that were recently infected, or people that were brought from the previous village, or maybe even a mixture of both. Most lives in this game come to an end. I tied up every loose end, even the guy that was across from the hole from me, and I couldn't figure out how to kill him, and then I realized what this game does perfectly is making new areas feel so fresh and unique. They usually do this by adding a new enemy you haven't really encountered a whole lot before. And the radio tower is no different. This is home to the banshees and the banshee babies. A screamer who, when upon death, just spawns many tiny birds that will peck at your face until it's gone. I looted the entire place and even found some compressor parts for my compressor to fill up oxygen tanks with air for the dive. This in turn brought me back to the Elephant Kid side quest. as the elephant mother and her kids don oxygen tanks, and if I did this big favor for her, I might be rewarded with one back. The kid was hiding, stashed out in a closet area by the mushroom granny. The mushroom granny claims that he had passed by a few days ago, but she was just lying to protect him. Although I had gained her trust, she gave me the key to the place, and I was able to take the kid back to the elephant mother. It's very strange seeing a person's face, as we only have seen very few, which included those kind of like the doctor and even this child and maybe the mushroom granny. We brought the kid back to the elephant mother and she was very pissed at him, all things considered. But she held up her end of the bargain and gave me an oxygen tank that I could actually use in the compressor to store air. This will help us dive to find the roots of the talking tree. After a dream sequence and a half, we finally make our way to the tunnel where the living root is seen. It is a white, pulsating mass of a root. We have to burn it to the ground, and apparently the cripple claims this will take an entire in-game day. I find a conveniently placed gasoline tank right next to the living tree's root. I set it off, and some gasoline starts pouring in. I didn't have any matches on me to light the fire, but luckily I had a Molotov, so that will do. I got out of Dodge as fast as I could, and I witnessed on the surface the fruits of my labor. Meet the Snail is a character that I only talked to once in this playthrough and I had not helped, so I will have to dive into the lore and backstory of this man very in depth. He is a replica, if you couldn't tell already, and he used to live in a cottage by the junkyard that we could visit. Through the notes and backstory that we could find of the snail, he was a presumably very smart individual. He tried to record the sound of the being using tapes he'd found, trying to figure out what it was and where it was coming from. I recently visited the radio tower, and he theorizes that the voice can be coming from said radio tower. According to his diary, he was eating lots of snails and grass. This is probably why he was replicated into the way he was, a snail and a man. He was formed on the roof of the house, and then it collapsed under his weight when he first tried to move. He's very quick to insult the protagonist's appearance, though, which I find quite hilarious. You have a quest line where you can help him move out of the shell, and I didn't do this one, but that is an option. There's also one character I didn't even meet in this playthrough, and that is the Bike Man, and we'll be talking about him a little bit. There's not really much to say about the Bike Man, he's just an alcoholic, and he transports bags of goods throughout the woods. A character that you can meet, but honestly not much to say about him. The radio that was in my base that would be spoken into by possibly the being had caught on fire. It was asking why I did what I did, and before I knew it, the other half of the base was catching on fire. Burning corpses would start to crawl out of the fire and attempt to attack and murder me. It was only a few at first, and then it divulged into dozens at the same time as the night went on. I honestly thought I was supposed to maybe die here, but I didn't, luckily. The elephant mother had mentioned an explosion somewhere near the junkyard, so I went to check it out because that sounds really interesting. And, well, remember Pietrick, how he said he would blast off in a rocket ship? Well, a corpse with antennas on it, similar to the appearance of Pietrick, is no coincidence. Salute to a real one, I hope you found the stars. This is probably one of the more innocent deaths in the game, to be honest, and I do feel kind of bad witnessing it. Nonetheless, had good loot in the rocket that I needed. But, well, that's his story wrapped up. We're getting near the end of the story, but don't worry, we're going to be having a lot more discussion after it's all wrapped up. So I come back the next day to the burning tree, and I see that the cripple is nowhere to be found, and I'm like, oh, holy shit, he burned alongside with the tree somehow. So I was pretty devastated because he was just a guy who wanted the screams of the villagers to disappear, and he didn't really deserve it. Nonetheless, I find a hole that is created from where the talking tree was burned down. I run into it, and well, said it didn't exist, and as you can see here, the crippled old man is crawling on his hands because he doesn't have any legs. I thought he had burned down, but I guess this is kind of a happy ending for him, I don't know. The background noise, music, droning, and ambience just sent shivers down my spine. It felt like we were reaching the end, it felt like what we worked for mattered. I even watched the old man crawl because I didn't know how far he would crawl, and honestly, I didn't stick around for it, but... So it all comes down to this. So I spent the epilogue fairly well in the beginning. I was running around north like a fucking idiot, and then I realized maybe I should try running in a different direction, and shortly after I found something very nice. I was like, holy shit, I'm actually seeing civilization, but a part of me was still skeptical. This game, as depressing as it is, will not just give you a happy ending. Nonetheless, I was trying to avoid those suspicions, and I just played the game as I should. I was seeing buildings, and I eventually ran into my first floor neighbor. Not sure I entirely captured it on camera, but as I ventured north into this apartment, I noticed white goo coming out, similar to that of the white substance, and that is when my suspicions were getting the better of me. I make my way into the apartment, which was actually part of a dream sequence at one point early on in the game. I walk around and it looks just like old times. I don't see my wife, however, but my dog is there. I make my way to the bedroom and I look at the bed, and my character simply just says that he's exhausted and he went through 22 days of human torment, which is the amount of in-game days I spent. I was really skeptical. I didn't want to click go to sleep, but at this point, it was like 2 a.m. for me when I was playing this, and I just wanted this story to be over for the sake of it, so I could go to sleep in real time. So I did what was probably the dumbest thing, and I went to sleep in the bed. Got my shoes off, got comfortable, and I just went into a deep sleep. And I go to sleep, and the game has some after messages talking about what the characters had been up to that I met in Darkwood. Some of them were kind of decent, some of them were pretty sad. They didn't even mention the doctor in my playthrough, so he's probably far gone. I didn't get to do every side quest, but I was pretty content with that. But nonetheless, it just gives me some dialogue on what the characters were going through, and I have a peaceful sleep, and life continues on normally. Or so I thought. Everything will be explained very soon, but first we must try the other ending, which is deemed the true ending. Well, if that's the true one, what could be better than finding your way back to civilization and passing out in a deep sleep? Well, let's figure this out. I probably wouldn't have figured out this ending if it hadn't been for like a Wikipedia tutorial page. There's about 20 plus steps in it, so I do what I did the first time. I find the civilization and go into the apartment building. What I do differently, however, this time is that I go into the basement of the building, which is right near the entrance, and I go at the end of a long hallway with only one door that's able to be opened. There's a jar in the room, but most importantly a radio, and I change the frequencies until it tells me to go to sleep. There's an option to go down the north part of this hallway, and there will be a homeless man begging for change. I can ignore him and just try to open the metal door to the right. It will not open, however, and I decide to go back down the hallway, to which I'm greeted by the door opening and a baby crying in there and a woman saying, "You're waking my baby, please stop." I try to go inside the door, but it won't budge, to which only one ray of light will shine upon. It's also optional to try to peer through the cracks in the side of this wall, and at first I didn't really see much, and then it made itself known. It says to run down the hallway until you see visible roots, but I didn't really see any roots. I still went to my apartment anyways, and this ending played out, so. I meant to drag the couch in my living room backwards until I see a bunch of roots. This prompts me to wanting to remove the flooring in order to find said roots. Eventually, I go into the kitchen, grab a big screwdriver, and remove the flooring. At this point, I remove every single piece of flooring in my apartment, and that's when the ambience starts to kick in again. Something really isn't right. I do this until I reach the bedroom, in which case I will remove the flooring in the bedroom. Only then will I inspect my bed, hopefully going to sleep after discovering this. But there's an option to look closer into the bed and feel under it. After enough investigation, it prompts you to drag the bed away, to which you'll be greeted by a hole in the ground. You enter it, and You wake up naked as the protagonist, and you're nowhere near civilization, it seems. You seem to be back in Darkwood, and he describes this place as a sort of valley. The lore of the being is that he is in the heart of Darkwood, which is known as a valley of sorts. You are within the mouth of the beast, so to speak. Sleepers are caking the floor, and a lot of them are in a deep sleep, unable to be woken up. This alludes to the fact that in the Bliss ending, it was actually a bad thing to go to sleep. You quickly put two and two together, and you realize that the protagonist was under the control of the being, and that the road home was actually hallucination all along. The deep sleep would make you comatose forever until you starve to death. Giving into the sleep actually was the worst ending. But this alludes to the idea of ignorance is bliss, in which case, would you personally want to know the horrible truth that you were being lied to all along on this journey? Or would you rather sleep while avoiding that harsh truth, succumbing to what you didn't know as your imminent death, while also preserving some sort of your sanity? Well, here we are, the thing that caused us to lose our minds, cause the death of many people, and block us off from civilization. We meet the being, and next part of this ending step is to place your hand upon it, to which you'll feel safe and secure, but this is just one of the many manipulative tactics of the being. You have to force your hand away, and it prompts you to do this a couple times. It wants you to go into a lullaby sleep, much like the other people around you, but we all know how that's going to play out. We find a man in a deep slumber, and things are coming full circle right now because this is that runaway guy known as Maciek. Presumably dead, he is one of the few survivors of the Outsiders. As far as I know, only the protagonist and Maciek are alive at this point. He's grasping a weapon of some kind, and if you read the notes scattered throughout the world, if you've played it, you'd know that he was grabbing a flamethrower and coming towards the being. This is where we can achieve the ending called Burn Them All. Flamethrower plus the name of that ending equals, yeah, you guessed it. I had to do what I had to do, and Maciek was even trying to crawl towards me and attack me to get his sweet beloved flamethrower back. I went fire happy, as you can see from the gameplay, and shortly after, everything started to burn. All the sleepers had awoken after I started to burn the being, and they tried crawling towards me, attacking me. Not only did the being have to be burned, but so did the trees, and unfortunately innocent lives that were sleepers were lost. I had to do what I had to do. It was for the cause, and when I try to escape, many people are fighting me to try to get upon the tiny little branch. As I try to run across it, an inferno sparks up, and I get severely injured and torched in the process, but I'm still alive and crawling. As I make my way across the branch and the fire begins to spread, I'm slowly moving back and forth with my arms and legs. Ultimately, what ends up happening though is that my character lies still and the camera pans off screen. A vast majority of the forest ended up dying, including the protagonist. Some messages fade in slowly before the credits, showing the fates of most of the characters. They've told me many a people have died, including the three, the chicken lady, the mushroom granny, and so on. They go and say not everyone died, however. A little ironic, but they say that Pietrek didn't live to see the fire. They claim he was one of the ones who were saved from Darkwood by dying before it could happen. But we clearly seen his rocket ship crash. They say the Wolfman's whereabouts are unknown, they don't know what happened to him. The protagonist awoke from a slumber because he had become a sleeper. He hadn't escaped the forest and he found some sort of crack in the dream sequences and tunneled through. The plague, alongside with the being and the root networks, will not exist within a few days. Your protagonist was strong, he knew what he had to do at the cost of his own life. He even claims Maciek as one of us when he was talking to his sleeper. This alludes to both of them being outsiders, of course. Let's touch on things that I really hadn't discussed at all in this video now. First off, I didn't activate Indiegogo content. It was immersion breaking, plus I didn't really care for it. But that is basically just developer stuff that they put in the game to kind of be cutesy and whatnot. A fun fact about the developers of Darkwood, Acid Wizard Studios: if you click on a link to a forum page on their Steam tab in the library, you'll find out that they actually had put this game up on Pirate Bay, a very famous torrenting site for video games and stuff like that. Basically, you're getting the contents of the game illegally through getting it for free. but the developers themselves had published it upon the Pirate Bay at first because they believed in the policy that if you liked the product enough, then you would go out of your way to spend money on it later. And this actually seemed to have worked. There were emails praising them pretty much, stating that they couldn't afford it or that certain areas of the world had locked the game out. Plus, at the time in Poland, piracy wasn't really illegal. Although it is a very controversial topic, and many people did complain to the studio about it being immoral, that didn't really change much. But let's talk about a couple of the dream sequences, shall we? So there was a lot of writing about things called thieves, but what the hell are the thieves about? Well, basically, the 3C village, the village that was first infected by the plague, had thieves break into the basement of said village. You're essentially within the basement and you see crates full of foods and other various supplies. There is a tunnel that presumably leads somewhere as time goes on. It is an infinite loop of a dream sequence. And this was because the thieves had dug a tunnel so that they wouldn't have to face the angry villagers they had locked in a room. But the tunnel was full of dead thieves. You get trapped and killed by this red substance that can attack you during nighttime. This dream sequence occurs when you dive into the water to burn the talking tree root. And once you emerge from the water, you notice that the basement that you are currently in with the tree root is the same exact one as the dream sequence. There is also something I didn't encounter in this playthrough known as the snout in the swamp. People think it's a giant pig, but they seem to think that it's a replica of the sow. It seems to be causing electrical storms around the snout. I saw one theory saying that it was a combination of the sow and the electrical cables that were cut by Hanuska way back when. This seems pretty plausible as the electrical shocks were used as a torture method for the sow, and plus the pig snout. It was theorized way back when in the video, but it was confirmed on an Ask Me Anything on Reddit in 2023 that Acid Wizard did confirm that the shiny stones were meteor fragments. In fact, we should really explore the Ask Me Anything as there is some hard knowledge that we've theorized and speculated throughout the video. There are many important questions that need answering, such as why there are so many Jacobs on the development team. A developer of the game went to answer on and say that the mystery and speculation and discussion of possible theories going throughout Darkwood are what make the game special, and I would have to agree it is what makes the game unique. He even states it would diminish the charm of the game, and I would have to heavily agree on that. Knowing every single thing may lead to zero imagination. There was talk about why the merchant was killed, and they claimed that he cheated on prices and sold old mushrooms. This is 99% probably a joke, but it would be very funny if this was the case. They've had many different game projects in the past, such as The Prisoner, but at the time of writing this, they seem to have not cared too much about the development of that game. They're continuing a new game called Soccer Kids currently, and it's in the alpha. You could play it for free on the Steam store right now. Somebody claimed in the reviews that there was a Darkwood reference, so that might pique your interest a little bit. It is way more upbeat than Darkwood. As far as we know, it is way more harmless looking than Darkwood, and it is purely a sports soccer game top down view similar to Darkwood. The reviews are actually very positive, but most of them just reference Darkwood as jokes. I hope you were intrigued or entertained by this video. I hope you learned something quite new about the game, and for those who just don't even know the story, I hope it was an interesting topic. I obviously couldn't cover every single detail, but I do feel as if I have covered a majority of what was pretty important. There is a Steam community lore page, and I used that to refresh my mind on what I was going through. Because the game is quite lengthy, 18 hours estimated just for doing the main things. I'll be sure to put a link to that in the description so you guys can read up on it too. There are also a couple other video essays on this game, and some of them are pretty informative. I would highly recommend checking those out as they probably dove deeper into some of the other topics that I haven't. But if you stuck with me this far, I hope you enjoyed, and I hope you never find yourself in a place like Darkwood.